And I'd like to introduce Alan Spears, my partner in crime for many years. Alan is the head of cultural resources at the National Parks Conservation Association. And Alan is the legislative liaison to the board of the Rosenwald Park campaign from MPCA, and he does great work. He was very involved, pivotally involved in the creation, the designation of the Emmett Till and Mamie Mobley Till National Monument last summer, summer of 2023, by President Biden. And we also have another member of the board of the campaign sitting back there, Sandra Conway. Sandra is from Chapel Hill. She's very involved in social justice. And interestingly, this morning she was involved in the creation of the Dudley Flood Center, and she had the opportunity she picked up Alan at the airport to bring him here this morning, but after the morning session, she and Dr. Flood had a really good conversation. He's terrific. So today, Alan and I are going to share talking about the project to create the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Historical Park. And so let's begin. Okay, so how did this all come about? And this journey started in a Saturday afternoon in 2015 when my husband and I wanted to go see a movie. And we couldn't agree on a movie that we wanted to see. And we lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and we happened to see a little column with a review of a documentary called Rosenwald. How many of you have seen this documentary? Okay, well, those who haven't, it's well worth seeing. So the filmmaker was Viva Kempner. She's a DC filmmaker. And my husband and I went to see it. And it's an hour and a half long. But before we went to see it, I said to Jerry, have you ever heard of Julius Rosenwald? And he said, no. Have you? No. We're both Jewish. We never, we always, the review talked about Sears Roebuck, and we'd always known that Sears Roebuck had a reputation of being very waspish. So we went. And it was inspirational. It was motivating. And when it was over, it was sort of like a eureka moment. I turned to my husband and I said, there needs to be a national park for Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. Now, I didn't know anything about Julius Rosenwald, but I knew a lot about the national park system, having gone to so many national parks. And I knew that there wasn't one park in the system that commemorates the life and legacy of a Jewish American, nor was there one that tells the story of the impact of the Rosenwald schools. So this is how it all began, and I'll take a minute to talk about Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington. These two men were very different, but they also were very similar in certain ways. Booker T. Washington was born enslaved. He basically walked across Virginia from his home in southwestern Virginia to go to Hampton Institute and get an education. He was highly educated, and he was selected to go down to Alabama and was able to create the Tuskegee Institute, basically from nothing. The students made the bricks, they built the buildings, and so on and so forth. And Booker T. Washington was an amazing fundraiser, too. He had important white people from the North on the board. He got money from the Carnegie. And he was looking for somebody new to get on the Tuskegee board. And also, Julius Rosenwald was the son of German Jewish immigrants. He left high school before he graduated to go to New York to learn the clothing trade from his rich uncles. He wasn't that he couldn't finish high school, but he wanted to learn the trade. And he came back to Chicago, and he was manufacturing men's suits, and he was doing well. He wasn't rich, but he got an enormously lucky break, and his brother-in-law had done the soft drink concession for the World Trade Expositions in Chicago in 1893, and because he had done a favor for Marshall Field, who was a very rich man in Chicago. And so he became wealthy, and he went to see Richard Sears, who had just started a new catalog company. And Richard Sears was an amazing merchandising person, and they said that he could sell you a breath of fresh air. But, and we've known some people like that, but he didn't know how to run a business. It was chaos, and Rosenwald's brother-in-law, I know I'm going into too much detail, I'm sorry, but Rosenwald's brother-in-law offered to sell Sears a system for sorting shipments and keeping track of things, and he said no. Alva Roebuck is leaving the company, and I will sell you a half share in Sears Roebuck for $75,000. That was a lot of money back then. And his brother-in-law, Nussbaum, went to Julius Rosenwald and said, would you buy a half of my half? And Rosenwald thought the catalog business was good. He also, Sears also owed them money for suits that they had delivered to Sears, and he bought in for $37,500. And as Alan often says, the rest is history. Between Sears' merchandising genius and Rosenwald's business acumen, Sears became really important. It is actually the retailing powerhouse of the 20th century. So why am I telling you all this? He became, by a lucky break, he became very wealthy. His Jewish background and belief in tzedakah, which is a Hebrew word, which is like social justice, charity, righteousness, helping people in need, making the world a better place. And he had a friend in New York named Paul Sachs. And if Sachs sounds familiar, Goldman Sachs will sound even more familiar. And Paul Sachs was a junior partner in Goldman Sachs, and he was sort of a mentor to Julius Rosenwald, and he told Julius Rosenwald in 1910 to read 2 books. One was Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and the other was a biography of a man named William Baldwin, who was a train tycoon, and who also served on the board of Tuskegee and the General Education Board, which provided support for black and white schools in the early 20th century. So, I'm telling you this, Julius Rosenwald was asked by the YMCA people in Chicago to help support building a YMCA for African Americans. And his answer was the following. I will give this was in 1910, the end of 1910. I will give $25,000 to any city in the United States that will put up independently $75,000 to build a YMCA. Now, they were coming just asking him for Chicago. And he believed in challenge grants, and this is going to go into Booker T. Washington, too. I'm taking a long route, but I'm going to get there. And so that program started at the end of 1910. And as I told you, Booker T. Washington was looking for a new board member for Tuskegee. By the way, that program, there were 24 YMCAs and 2 YWCAs that were built between 1910 and 1932 with that program, using challenge grants. So Booker T. Washington comes to Chicago in May of 1911. Julius Rosenwald has a luncheon for him and then takes him to show him the Sears plant, which had been built with funds. They went public using Goldman Sachs. And the 2 men strike it off. And shortly thereafter, Booker T. Washington invites Rosenwald to come down to Tuskegee. And Rosenwald, being the good businessman that he was, he said, I'm going to come see it before I do it. He goes down there with his family. He goes, a lot of you are old enough to remember Jane Addams and the Hull House, and they go down and see Tuskegee. They're very impressed. He agrees to join the board, okay? And in 1912, Julius Rosenwald, August, turns 50 years old. Does he have a gala birthday party? Does he throw a lot of money to the winds? No. He gives a lot of money away to charities, one of which is Tuskegee. And he gave $25,000 to Tuskegee, and a month later, Booker T. Washington says, can I have $2,800 for a pilot project to build 6 schools in rural Alabama? And so begins, with those 6 schools, the Rosenwald School Building Program. And how were the men? I told you they were very different in terms. One was born enslaved. The other was the son of German Jewish immigrants. Booker T. Washington was much more educated than Julius Rosenwald. And he even was a mentor to him, giving him books to read, like books by W.E.B. Du Bois, and so on. However, they were also very different. They were both very results-oriented, practical, pragmatic men. They both believed in the concept of a challenge grant, and they believed in giving while you live. So this photo, which has taken a very long time to get to, is taken in like February of 1915 when Julius Rosenwald was at the campus for a board meeting. You usually see the one of the 2 men walking together. It's taken, I believe, the same day. And they had a very good partnership. Now, unfortunately, Booker T. Washington died in November of 1915. You heard that. He had very bad high blood pressure. There was no treatment then. But Rosenwald continued with the program, and a lot of you know a lot about that, so I'm not going to go into detail. And I'm sure you've seen this map many, many times. And I think no matter how many times you see it, it's very potent, it's very powerful, because it shows just how effective the program was. It went from 6 schools to 4,977 when the actual school building program ended, and 1 more was added when Franklin Roosevelt wanted to have a school by Warm Springs where he would go for his legs and paralysis. And it was the Eleanor Roosevelt Rosenwald School, and he asked the Rosenwald Fund to contribute to the school, so they did. So in total, there are 4,978 schools. And now I will turn it over to my partner in crime, Alan Spears.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Before I get started, Sandra, raise your hand. Emma, raise your hand. You 2 need to meet. My name is Alan Spears. I'm the Senior Director for Cultural Resources at the National Parks Conservation Association, based out of Washington, D.C. We are a 501c3 nonprofit and an advocacy organization for national parks. In PCA, we regard ourselves as being the leading voice of the American people on behalf of their national parks, and it's a mission that NPCA has been involved in since 1919, when we were established by the first director of the National Park Service, Stephen Mather. I've been around for quite that long. I've only been there for going on 26 years at this point in time. And it would be great if you spend a little bit of time to look up our website, www.npca.org. But you have to be careful, because we are not the National Paint Coating Association, nor are we the National Police Canine Association. It's the National Parks Conservation Association. So look for the little square with the 2 bears. What I wanted to talk to you all about today is, and to try to do it in a succinct manner, is the campaign that Dorothy has been running so capably for the last 8 years or more has as one of its primary objectives the designation of a new national park, the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Monument, National Historical Park, whatever the name is that we were able to attach to that. I'm the guy, one of the people involved in this campaign handling the politics. So I am actually a registered lobbyist. You need to be careful what you say to me and how close you stand to me, because if you get too close, I'll have to report it to Congress. But the idea is, so why a national historical park or a national monument? And There might be some national park fans in this room, I sure hope so, but one of the things I'd like to share with you right off the bat is that there are 431 units in our current national park system. Units meaning everything from the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Frederick Douglass Home, the Clara Barton Home, the Maggie Walker Home, Gettysburg National Military Park. These are all units of the national park system. Every single one bears the responsibility for interpreting, managing, and preserving historic and cultural resources. So the National Park Service has been in the historic and cultural resource management business from day one, when it was established in 1916. So that's why we want to see preserved at the federal level the Rosenwald story. Let me stop for a second and say that I congratulate you, and I am in the debt of everyone in this room who has done excellent work at the local level and the state level here in North Carolina to protect and enhance the Rosenwald story, because it is a critical lesson about how groups of disparate people can come together and how much importance African American communities placed in education. And it is one of the things that is maybe most frustrating for me just on a personal level to see that we have generations now that have to be forced to go to school, forced to get an education. And we have ancestors who gave everything that they had and then some to make sure that many of the people in this room had an opportunity to get an education because they understood the power in education. Booker T. Washington understood that. Julius Rosenwald understood that. And so we want to preserve this story at the federal level. It's going to take some doing right now. We have been working with President Biden to designate a national monument via a 1906 law called the Antiquities Act. We've had some sobering news about that, but we also have some bills both in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate. So we are moving forward in every way that we possibly can, because I think while the local level and the state level preservation efforts are critically important, having this particular story preserved at the federal level gives it a significance and meaning that it deserves. Not that can't be given here in North Carolina. You guys got that and then some. South Carolina got it and then some. Georgia got it and then some. But when you think about a Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald Schools National Monument or National Historical Park being in the same system as the Grand Canyon, that elevates that story. The coming together of these two men, Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, of African American and Jewish American relations, which has taken a hit recently, sad to say, but how those two folks came together and saw the power of education, the power of taking a step and doing something to advance and help people to make a way out of no way. Rosenwald, for his part, I think was leaning in the direction of learning more about the African American experience, but he was born and raised in Springfield, Illinois. And when he is in Chicago working for Sears, Springfield suffers a race riot, a two-day race riot in the summer of 1908. A couple of African American folks are lynched during that riot, and many elements of the African American community in Springfield are burned down. And what Rosenwald, I think, takes to heart, hearing that news, is that this racial violence, or racialized violence, is not simply the purview of the American South. It's happening in Illinois. It's happening in the town where he was born and raised. And so I think that helps to push him towards taking more of an interest in African American education, the African American experience. This is a story that is worth protecting and preserving, again, at the federal level, also at the local level. But here's where I'm going to take a moment to complicate your day, and you will understand after I share this information with you why I no longer get invited to dinner parties anymore. Preservation, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or the federal level, is an inherently political process. Doesn't matter who you vote for, and doesn't matter what side you're on. It is an inherently political process because there's money involved, there's policy involved, and it is, to some extent, a zero-sum game. If I give you $50,000 and I give you $50,000, I might not have $20,000 even to give to you or to you, Dorothy. And so there are decisions that are being made right now. The previous group of presenters that were up here mentioned two National Park Service grant sources, the HBCU, or Historically Black Colleges and Universities Grant Program, and they also mentioned the African American Civil Rights Grant Programs. These are managed by the National Park Service. They get their funding from Congress on an annual basis, sometimes not on an annual basis if Congress is going to let the government shut down. I'm here to tell you right now that the Cultural Resource Stewardship Program of the National Park Service has seen cuts to their budget and staffing level of 11.5% over the last decade. It is possible that we will face folks coming into office who will want to slash federal spending and the staff roles for agencies in the federal government. which means that the historically black colleges and universities grant program, African American civil rights grant programs, could be cut or targeted for elimination. I share that with you because as you are working as hard as you possibly can to protect and maintain resources here in North Carolina and elsewhere related to Julius Rosenwald, I am asking you as a personal and professional favor, keep an eye out on the politics, keep an eye out on the budgets. Because if the National Park Service does get those budget cuts and suffers from budget or staffing reductions, they will be less capable of helping you to protect and preserve the resources that you think are important. Now, the good news about this is, for our campaign, President Trump, in his first administration, was the president who signed the Special Resource Study Act into law that allowed us to make progress towards where we are right now in our campaign. If we're not able to advance the bills that we have currently in the House of Representatives or the Senate, my intention is to approach the new administration once they are in office and suggest to the president and his Secretary of the Interior and his folks on the White House Council of Environmental Quality that they now have an opportunity to finish the work that they started in 2017, or 2019. 21. 21.
We signed it January 13th.
2021. Time flies. But the idea is this is not to predict gloom and doom. It is to say that one of the leading federal agencies, by virtue of the sites they manage and the stories they interpret and protect, which is looking out for stories like Rosenwald, helping to provide money that supports the work that you are doing at the state level and the local level, is in jeopardy of seeing some substantial cutbacks. We need everybody to be on the lookout for that and to at least do a little bit of shouting in support of the National Park Service and in support of federal preservation programs. Again, the work that you do here in North Carolina is critical, but what the Park Service does with these outward-facing grant programs, in other words, these are not going to maintain elk in Rocky Mountain, they're going to communities out here helping to maintain historic and cultural resources. That work is nothing less than the democratization of preservation in this country. And the Park Service is leading that work, helping folks tell good, inclusive, accurate stories about our shared national narrative. It's not black history, white history, Native history, women's history, LGBTQ history. It's our shared national narrative. And we need to make sure that the funding sources and the staffing levels of the agency that is the leading agency to protect and preserve those stories is protected in perpetuity so these places can be maintained for your benefit, enjoyment, and inspiration. Now, I think we have a good opportunity, maybe not this time around, but we're going to work it as hard as we can, but we're not giving up anything. We will get a national park for Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. So let me close with this and turn it back over to Dorothy. We will be back in touch with everybody in this room when the time is right for you to write someone, call someone, text someone, send a letter to someone, a smoke signal to somebody to say that you support the preservation of the Julius Rosenwald and Rosenwald school story at the federal level. So I have lots of business cards. I will be happy to talk with anybody after the session, or you can email me, send me a text message, or give me a phone call. But connecting the folks that are in this room, managing the very business of protecting and preserving these resources, you all are critical here in North Carolina, at the state level, at the local level, but you also have a role to play in national affairs for preservation and conservation. So with that, thank you for your time. I'll turn it back over to Dorothy. I think we're only in the 5th slide. We've got 927 of these to get through in the next 15 minutes. So Dorothy, you're up.
Thank you, Alan, but don't give up hope. Yeah, what was it John Lewis said? Keep on, keep on. Yeah. And so we're going to keep on, not only for this park, but also for all of our national park system. Somebody once said that the national parks are the best idea America ever had. Okay, so why a National Historical Park? This story is of national historic significance. I will give you more about that in a minute. And it exemplifies the value of partnerships between different people, of different cultures, different backgrounds, who came together to work together to advance education and make the nation more democratic. And it's not just the two men, as you well know, it's the communities. Without the communities, there wouldn't be the schools. Okay, so this is a little history, kind of boring, but I'll give it to you anyway. We got started in 2017, and we had 2 members of our board who were former high-level National Park Service employees in cultural resources. We went out to the 15 states in which the Rosenwald schools were built, and we asked the state historic preservation officers to recommend up to 5 schools in each state that they thought would be good candidates to be in an ultimate national historical park. Every state except Missouri made nominations. Missouri only had 4 schools built, 3 are gone, and 1 is used for a training center, and it would not be appropriate to be in a national park. So there were 55 schools that were recommended, and 1 teacher home, the teacher home being in South Carolina. And then the first thing we came out with is a historic context study that was published in October 2018. It's on our website. It gives background into Julius Rosenwald, his life, his legacy, the schools, and also about Rosenwald Fellows. I'd like to thank North Carolina for having panels on 5 Rosenwald Fellows in addition to the information on the school program, because that was another part of Julius Rosenwald's legacy and philanthropy. They awarded fellowships to 900 people, usually at the beginning of their careers, and of them, 2/3 were African Americans, and it's Marian Anderson, Ralph Bunche. I guess I had some people in my house doing some work, and I said, "Do you know Marian Anderson?" "No." "Do you know Ralph Bunche?" "No." But they did know Ralph Ellison. They did know James Baldwin. So it's just a tremendous amount of people who showed that African Americans, when given equal opportunity, could achieve just as well as anybody else in the nation. So it was both the schools at the primary level and then for the young professionals mainly who made a real change in this country. So that was our first report. And then North Carolina recommended 5 schools, and we visited 3 of those schools. Of the 56 facilities that were recommended, we visited 34. Between 2018 and 2019, we were going to visit, in 12 states, we were going to visit some schools in the other 2 states, Kentucky and Louisiana, but we know what happened in 2020. So this is the Canter School. I may not be pronouncing it. By the way, Claudia Stack was very involved with the school. I met her when I visited that school in 2019. It's in Pender County, near Wilmington. This is the Rosenwald School in Durham County. It's a beautiful school, beautifully. Some of the original fixtures are just terrific, like the sliding doors and the windows. And I'll get back to Russell School in a minute. This is the Williamstown School. Okay. And this is in Martin County. So of the 5 that were recommended, we visited 3. The other 2 are the Allen Grove School, a 2-teacher school in Halifax County, and the 5th one is the Ware Creek Rosenwald School. Okay? Now let me say one thing. These nominations were made in 2017, 7 years ago, and there are schools that at that time, I know one in South Carolina that was about to fall into the ground, and they came up and saved it. Amazing restoration. And there's one in Virginia that has a very important civil rights history associated with it, but they weren't in any part of the system of preservation, so it was a moving target. Okay, so some of the schools that were recommended but not being considered now can be considered later, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so in 2019, we needed to get a national park, a new national park. You usually need to have the National Park Service do a special resource study. And to do a special resource study, it takes legislation in Congress. And so we met with Congressman John Lewis. It was an amazing meeting. And he became one of the co-sponsors of the legislation in the House. This is just a little bill like this, you know, because a special resource study is just the study. But there was legislation in the House, there was legislation in the Senate, and it was introduced in June of 2019, and it got passed. It was another one of the things to the last minute, and it was another Hail Mary, but maybe it was only a 30-yard pass, and it got passed through Congress in the end of 2020, and we know what happened in the beginning of 2021, and it was January 13, 2021 was the last day that President Trump could sign the bill, otherwise it would become a pocket veto. But he signed it. And so John Lewis who went to a Rosenwald school in Alabama, one that no longer exists, and it was a very memorable meeting. You can see Alan, and those of you who know Stephanie Deutsch, she's the one with the back to the camera. She wrote the book, You Need a Schoolhouse. This is the bill, it was passed in as I said, it became law in 2021, and they started work on it, and they had a public meeting in summer of 2022. But in 2021, later that year, we came out with a report on identifying and evaluating Rosenwald school facilities that are recommended for inclusion in a National Historical Park. It's on our website, and it has short summaries of the 34 facilities that we visited, and I'd be happy to talk to any of you about it. But I'm going to go back, actually, that's because I'm so well organized. I'm going to go back to the legislation to do the special resource study. The legislation directed the National Park Service to do a study of the sites associated with Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools. And so there were 4 sites in Illinois that are associated with the life of Julius Rosenwald. And we don't need to go into them for now. One happens to be his boyhood home, which was directly across the street from the home of Abraham Lincoln. However, Rosenwald was born in 1862. He never saw Lincoln alive. Of the 10 schools that were listed in the legislation, one, the Russell Rosenwald School, is included. So one school from North Carolina. There are a bunch of schools, some from Maryland, Virginia, and so on. I can tell you later. We don't need to go into that. So there is one school of the 5 that were recommended by the state. Okay, and 1, 2, 3, after January 13, 2021, the National Park Service comes out with its report, the Special Resource Study. It was delivered to Congress in June of this year. And what did it say? What did it determine? It determined that Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald schools are of national significance, national historic significance. Of the 12 Rosenwald schools, the 11 schools and 1 teacher home, it determined that only one met all the criteria for inclusion in a national park, and that was the San Domingo School in Maryland, on the eastern shore of Maryland. Now, the other schools, a number of them, like Rosenwald, are of superior quality, but the only school that was willing to have it, for which the owner was willing to donate it to the federal government, is the San Domingo School in Maryland. And I think that's the next. Okay, and this is a school. It's a 3-teacher school, 2-story school. It was built during the Tuskegee period of the building program. It's in a still rural area of Maryland on the eastern shore, and all the young people are going to Washington, Baltimore, Annapolis, and they're worried what's going to happen to the school when they're gone. And it's been in the Quinton family. They donated the land. Newell Quinton went there with his 7 siblings. His parents went there, but they had to leave in the 4th grade. And they instilled in all their children the importance of education. And you all are very familiar with this story. It's nothing new to you. And Newell Quinton went off and worked for the federal government. He retired, came back to Sharptown, Maryland, And he didn't even know it was the Rosenwald School, and he decided that they wanted to save the school and make it a community center. And he went into the government to look at the deed, et cetera. He found out it was the Rosenwald School. And so it's a powerful story. But it was the only school that was willing to be donated to the federal government. Okay, so what's the ultimate national park going to be? And don't ask me when it's going to happen. Maybe in 3 years, maybe in 2. And maybe we'll get part of it, like the San Domingo School this year. So it's going to have a visitor center in Chicago. That's where Rosenwald lived, worked, did his philanthropy. A small number of Rosenwald schools. There's, you can see I made that last night. There's no S on it. And then 4 or 5 other schools in various states. And when it's by congressional legislation, they're going to get to pick. And they might have to say, well, I want this one in my state, and I want that one in my state. But we'll see what happens. And then importantly, there will be a network of Rosenwald schools. And that would be schools that are not in the National Park Service, owned by the National Park Service, but affiliated with the National Park Service. And the current legislation before Congress says that that network will have grant-making authority, which means that the National Park Service will be able to make grants to help support those schools. And it will be established by congressional legislation. Okay. So we've been doing a lot to build support for the program, for the campaign, to get this National Historical Park. A week ago, we had an event at the Capitol Visitor Center, which is part of the U.S. Capitol, and we showed the campaign's 10-minute award-winning documentary. It's on our website, if you want to take a look at it. And then we had a panel discussion. And for those of you who know Stephanie Deutsch, Stephanie is, does this show? Yeah. That's Stephanie. And then the next person is Sharon Davies. Sharon is the president of the Kettering Foundation in Ohio. She was the provost at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Her father and other relatives went to the Centenary Rosenwald School in South Carolina. And she's an eloquent speaker about how important Rosenwald schools are. And then the next person is Newell Quinton of the John Quinton Foundation, which owns the San Domingo School, and he also speaks eloquently. And then there's the person, there had to be somebody to talk about the campaign. And I'm showing you this slide, which is all the co-sponsors. I don't think you can read it, but there were 13 co-sponsors of this event. And everything from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, National Parks Conservation Association, Trust for Public Land, on and on, the National Council of Churches, Jewish organizations, and so forth. And I think what's important in this time of our nation, that this, like what was done for building the Rosenwald schools, partnerships really matter, okay? And it's not a time for me, it's a time for we. And so that's why I'm showing you this slide, that we were able to get 13 organizations to cooperate on this. And so Alan has told you, I have hope. But we're going to get there. If it's not this year, we're still going to get there. Oh, and so there's one thing I would like to talk to you about very briefly. We put out a bi-monthly newsletter, and I've spoken to some people during the last day and a half. And we're including now in the newsletter little articles, short articles called snapshots that are submitted by, support groups for Rosenwald schools, about events, et cetera. And these are 3 articles that appeared in the last few months. The first one, you can't read it, is on the Hope School. That's in South Carolina. It's one of the schools that was recommended by the state of South Carolina. How many of you have been to the National Museum of African American History and Culture? Have you seen the little exhibit on Rosenwald schools? That is the Hope School right there. That's the exhibit. And basically the articles say, come and visit the Hope School. Another one is on the 100th anniversary of the Waynesboro Rosenwald School in Virginia. And the last one is about the Newtown School in Virginia, which hasn't been restored, and we're not sure whether it will be restored, but there's interest in it. So we would invite you, if you want to have an article, to please submit it, and we'd be happy to, after Stephanie edits it, we'd be happy to publish it. And so we also invite you to become a subscriber. We have 1,850 subscribers. The more subscribers we have, the more powerful our voice will be. And so, again, working together, we can all do better. So, thank you. You want to say anything else? You want to say anything else? We can have some questions. Alan is much more eloquent than I.
Hello. Alan, we spoke some about this earlier this summer, but you had, there was the feedback about advocating for the network. Can you describe to us more about the network? Is that more similar to Network to Freedom, or are there other models that we can kind of compare it to?
Yeah, thank you. So the National Park Service currently manages a program called the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Program. And it is active in over 40 states, has more than 500, 600 partners. And the idea is that if you are doing anything related to the preservation or interpretation of the Underground Railroad story or experience, you can apply for eligibility with the National Park Service, and if they deem you worthy, you become a member of the Network to Freedom program, and you can receive, I think the grants are still somewhere between, on the small end, $1,250, and on the large end, $25,000. I don't think it goes much above that. You have to match it dollar for dollar with a non-federal dollar. But when we were proposing this idea to Congress and the administration, the response was, well, we need a model, and we suggested the Network to Freedom program. So I think the significance of the network, and we are still working to make sure that that gets incorporated into legislation and then passed into law, was that there are so many Rosenwald schools. There are still a large number that are extant, not as many as we'd like. But we cannot get a national park unit that has 20 pieces to it. Non-contiguous, discontiguous, I'm never quite sure what the word is. And so the idea is maybe to get a couple of touch bases, Maryland's Eastern Shore, San Domingo, St. George in South Carolina, could be opportunities for other things to be incorporated. And then, of course, the Chicago component of this. And then create a network so people are not feeling left out, are feeling like they've got access to the resources at the federal level that can help them to build and cultivate and interpret and manage their story at a good level. So it's not established yet. It is called for in both pieces of legislation. If we're not able to get those passed this year, when we reintroduce bills in the 119th Congress in February, most likely of next year, we will work to make sure that our congressional champions incorporate the network again into the legislation, and that's what we hope to establish. Did I get it for you? Okay.
There are a couple other networks. One is the African American Civil Rights Network. So if any of the schools have civil rights history, there's something that they could apply for, because the St. George School in South Carolina that Alan just mentioned is a member of the African American Civil Rights Network, and after the school closed for educational purposes, they had voter registration drives and that sort of thing. So if there's something similar at one of your schools, you could apply for that now. It currently exists.
Anybody else? You mentioned 2 books that were issued and sold. What was the second?
Well, I have it. It's on. It's a book about William Baldwin, and I get to me afterwards. I'll look it up. I don't remember the name of the author. I know that we just bought a first edition copy. I don't think there was a second edition, and it's about his life. And he was the head of a railroad in Long Island, and he was very much Julius Rose in our. I think it's just in our shows how great my memory is. It's in our newsletter that came out earlier this week, and Julius Rosenwald read both books, Up from Slavery, and the biography of William Baldwin, and he wrote to his daughters and he said, "I want to be like Mr. Baldwin."
All right, thanks very much.